themselves, tell you about their roles within their program and what motivates them to be in this work. So Rebecca, let's start with you. Why don't you share?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I am Rebecca Fahrer. I am the program director of the Bridge at Girard Street, which is bridge housing in Columbia Heights area. I work for Community of Hope. I use she, her pronouns. And the question that you had asked us to say as we identify ourselves is what motivates us in our work. And I think for me, it is creativity and community. So having both of those be active in what I do every day is really important.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Gayan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me join the panel today. So my name is Gayan Troussard, and I am the division director for Valley Place. And Valley Place is the bridge housing program that's part of the wider organization Friendship Place. And I would say what motivates me to do what we do is the fact that I get to be part of helping individuals live the best life they possibly can, to get them from a place of, feeling like there's no hope to now, they can come out on the other side and feel hopeful. And I get to be part of that journey. So that's what motivates me.
Wonderful. Thank you guys both for sharing and being here this evening. Let's start just basic. What is bridge housing and why is it needed in DC right now? Rebecca, again, whoever wants to do some definitional stuff for our group here.
So I would say bridge housing is, as its name suggests, you're bridging a gap. And for those familiar with the other model of transitional housing, it's very similar, except that we have removed a lot of barriers or other things or rules that would prevent individuals from getting access to shelter. So, it was created with that response of the encampments and street homelessness, because the district saw a surge, especially during the pandemic. And even continuously. And so they needed something to capture those individuals. And you can't necessarily take individuals, from the street, because there's a backlog for housing. So we needed a place, bridge housing, to hold individuals while we work on, getting through that process of applying for the housing, connecting them with services, whatever, because there's lots of things that need to happen before they can transition to the next point of moving on into their homes. So that's what bridge is. I don't know if I gave a good definition, but that's the basis of bridge housing is meeting that gap between homelessness before you can get to that point of saying, I've leased up, I'm in my apartment. There's that in-between space, and that's where we fill that gap in bridge housing.
And you did a great job with that, Gayan. I think the only thing that I would add to that is this is part of dealing with the process that is housing in the District of Columbia, because it isn't just the magic wand waving of somebody gets a voucher and then they can move, that there is a lot of time and bureaucracy that goes between somebody getting matched to housing assistance and when they get that housing assistance in hand and can take the next step to lease up. And if somebody is living under sheltered or or in a tent or in an encampment or even couch surfing from place to place, it can be really difficult for their case managers to remain in contact with them and get all the things that are needed and asked for. Just to give you an idea, the basic application for a voucher is a 27-page process, and then it requires you to have your ID and your social security card and your proof of income and your birth certificate. Some of those things our folks may not have right away, and so it can really add to the time between when they get matched to an assistance and move into housing with that assistance. So we provide that bridge. And same thing, just to touch on what Gayan said about transitional housing. we're different from transitional housing because we don't have near the barriers for people or the expectations of some transitional programs. And we don't have a you must pass this mark in order to get housed. Instead, as soon as they get that housing assistance in hand, we're actively looking with them to help them process. We're just bridging the gap between when it gets assigned and when it gets in place.
Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. That's really good for everyone, just sort of as a base level of understanding. So both of your programs are relatively new. They were they launched as pilot programs. What inspired the launch of your bridge housing programs, and how did you go about getting those programs off the ground?
So that's the short answer is the District of Columbia asked us to. The longer answer to this is that both of our programs work with families and have worked for a long time. And I know Friendship Place has worked with singles and individuals more than Community of Hope is. But we were beginning to see that family homelessness is going down in the District of Columbia. And capacity for caring for them had increased, where the same was not true for singles and individuals. And so both of our organizations were really seeing the need for not only having a viable program with this, but both of us have at our core a trauma-informed harm reduction model, which we can talk about some of those more in a little bit, but you don't always see that when it comes to drop-in shelters or hypothermia sites or any of the places that are sort of available for singles or individuals. And a lot of singles and individuals, if they're not going there, end up someplace where there are all kinds of requirements around sobriety and curfews and behaviors. And so we were both the kind of organization that is looking at how can we do things in such a way that that takes down as many barriers to entry as possible, so people want to be a part of the program and we can support them as much as possible as they are moving forward. So we were able to be inspired that we could create this kind of program rather than just being told that we had to do something that looked a certain way. And I think that probably really helped both of our organizations get behind this, that we could see the need and we had the ability to be able to create something that reflected our values and the way we wanted to interact with folks.
Dan, do you have anything else you would add to that? You were nodding your head vigorously through, Rebecca.
She was hitting all the points.
Perfect.
Yeah, she was saying just that. I think the only thing that I would add, because like you mentioned, it was a pilot program, or I guess it is, and it was so new, we had to also get behind marketing for the program because no one knew what Bridge was. Mm-hmm. So even just getting the referrals in, we had to, do presentations and talk and, go around to other human service organizations where we would get the referrals from to say, this is who we are, we're here, this is what we can do. And it took a while. And even still, still people are still a little confused. What exactly is Bridge? But we had to kind of do that to get it out there. Because even though, the district approached us and wanted us to do this, and we did do it, now we need people to know we're here and that, we have these spaces, these beds that need to be filled. So marketing and working, with our development team was really key with that. So. Mm-hmm.
I got all of your marketing materials and we sent as many people as we could your way. So from GMC, and many of our guests have been through both programs, and we have a panel that are going to be talking about their experiences next week. But can you guys describe a little bit more the populations that you serve in your bridge housing programs, and what are some of the unique challenges that they face as they are trying to get stabilized into permanent housing?
So for Valley Place, we serve single adults. So no children or no families are coming into our program, single adults, so male and female participants. coexist in our building. I think some of the challenges that we're seeing, we have participants coming in who it's clear that there is a history of substance use or mental illness, but it's never been diagnosed. They've never had treatment. And so trying to work with them to wrap services around them so that they can become stable enough to move on to the next process. Because, you know, once they're in bridge housing, getting them stable and focused is a big goal. And the great thing about the program is that they have a case manager assigned within the bridge program, which is separate from the case manager that's assigned through their housing providers. So they have 2 case managers, which is great because we can all be teaming together and providing various services that they need, because they come in with a lot of needs. Very, you know, it presents different in other individuals, but we have been seeing that a lot with the substance use and the mental health, and just, you know, not having access because sometimes they're uninsured, and just even trying to apply for the insurance for them so that they can get the medical treatment that they need or the substance use treatment that they need, and just connecting them with providers. Those are some of the challenges. Or they have no documents, and you have to be they say document ready is a term that we use to be able to move to the next step. They have lost, because they've been so transient, they've lost their IDs, their social security, their birth certificates, they have nothing. So a lot of times we're starting from scratch to even get that taken care of for them. And they'll come in with no income, no sort of benefits. So just helping them, it's like ground zero. You're literally helping them to start all over. So those are some of the challenges that we are seeing in our program.
When people often ask me, like, what sort of population do you serve, or what are you noticing? There are a couple trends that are really important. Someone said to me very early on, 50 is the new 70 when it comes to folks that have been living on the street or living under sheltered for a long time. And they're not joking, because the health outcomes that we're seeing for people that are in their 40s and 50s are stuff that we would expect for people in their 60s and 70s and beyond. So in the time that we have done our program, we've had people dealing with stage 4 cancer that wasn't diagnosed until they were actually in the program, and their adrenaline levels from living outside have fallen enough to stop masking some of those symptoms. We've had a number of different surgeries, a lot of people who have very unstable type 2 diabetes, because the ability to sort of listen to their bodies and understand what needs to happen and follow through on basic healthcare is not very has not been very available to them when living in drop-in shelters or living in a tent. And we're also seeing that, like Anne said, there's a lot of mental health that is undertreated or untreated. There's quite a lot of substance misuse, but we're also seeing 2 things. There are a fair amount of people who have a lot of institutional trauma, whether that is trauma from being incarcerated or being in foster care, or, you know, some other situations like that. We've got a number of folks that have that to begin with. And then I think the other piece that is really heartbreaking is that we've had a fair amount of folks that are transgender or non-binary that have experienced a lot of trauma, both from families and sheltered living. So those are showing up. And then the other thing that I would say is that we're finding out there are a fair amount of people who are experiencing homelessness for the first time who are elderly. So there are a lot of folks that have come through the program that have been in their late 60s to late 70s. And some of them were dependent on somebody else to care for them. And when that person passed away, they did not have a place to be. So there's some very interesting things, folks who have been experiencing homelessness for a long time, and then folks that it is for the first time because they don't have any access or haven't had any access to the services that they need.
Thank you for sharing those experiences. How is bridge housing different than transitional housing, and what benefits because of those differences do you think that offers your residents?
I think one of the things that is just really big to note is that, like, transitional housing, while it has had its place, often carries with it some certain expectations. You need to start earning an income, finish an education, achieve and maintain your sobriety, whatever that we think you need to do before you can get housed. And we don't have that mindset at all. Our mindset is housing first, which means that if, the moment we can get you into your own place, then you are going to be way better equipped to be able to deal with some of the other situations that are in your life, whether it be income, gaining income, or education, or addressing sobriety, or addressing mental health, because the very fact of experiencing homelessness has its own trauma and concerns and crises that go with it that really make it difficult to focus on other things. And transitional housing often has you are here for this period of time and then you must go. And we are much more, while we're focused on trying to get folks housed within 90 days, we are really understanding that so much of what's going on with them is based in the system and they don't have control over that. So we work around continuing to keep folks motivated, continuing to connect them to services that will be able to go with them as they leave and are in their own place, and helping them reestablish the patterns of tenancy and living in a space that when they are going into their own space, they'll be able to take that with them. And rather than expecting that we know what's best for them and we know what they should do and the hoops that they should jump through, we try to work around what their goals are, what they see the needs are, accepting that they're the experts in their own lives and we are not. And so we try to very much work with what they see their goals and their needs are, with always that housing focus.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Oh, good, perfect. Go.
Yeah. I not much more to add. She said it beautifully, and it's because our programs, we mirror each other, and we really, really try to have that housing first principle embedded in everything that we do, because we realize that, so many of the participants, each time they've tried in the past to access some sort of housing, there's been barriers, like Rebecca mentioned. And so we try to eliminate as many of those barriers for our participants coming in, so that they really have a shot this time. They really have a chance. There's really nothing really standing in the way. And that's where our case managers, also come in to help to hold some of that, so they don't feel all that weight on them to say, okay, I have to do all of this on my own, because that could also be very daunting, because they're already experiencing the trauma of being homeless. And then to hold, that weight of, I need to make sure I get all my documents. I have to make sure I have this. And for some of them, there's some cognitive limitations, there's some literacy issues, and just helping them to navigate that. And so we really try to make sure that none of those things pose an issue for someone being able to have a basic right, which is to have a roof over your head.
Wonderful. How do you guys approach wraparound services, which meaning the additional services beyond housing that folks need, whether that's employment or case management? How do you guys approach that in your programs?
So for us, for participants coming in that we feel that they're at a good place, that they've voiced that they're unemployed and they're ready, they feel like they're ready to seek employment. Friendship Place has Aim Hire, which is assisting participants with job searches and finding good job placements for them. And the beautiful thing about our Aim Hire program is that we work with other partners who understand our population. So they're not blindsided by what's presented to them or turned off, like this is who, this is what we're presenting, this is the skills that they have, and they're willing to work with the, with the population that we serve. For others, outside of employment, we will ask to say, okay, we see that you're struggling with this. Would you be okay for us to connect you with mental health services or substance abuse services? Because we really see that this would really be beneficial to you, to help you in your journey now that you're here. So that's kind of how, because it's a partnership with the participants. All participants, they have their service plans, and they all have goals on their service plans. And within those goals, it could be something so simple as, finding employment, reconnecting with family, whatever it is that they feel, because we want them to feel supported in this journey. So if it means that, okay, I have not spoken to my sister or my brother, we're going to write the works, okay, family connections, we're going to try to make that happen. If it is like, yeah, I used to be in treatment, but I haven't gone in a while, okay, can we reconnect you with someone that can help you with that? So that's how we've been approaching the wraparound services.
And I think we have a very community of hope. We have 2 federally qualified healthcare centers in the district, and the Family Health and Birth Center. We have dental services. We have pharmacies attached to our healthcare services, as well as mental health and substance abuse services, including with Suboxone and Vivitrol, which can really help address opioid addictions and the misuse of alcohol. And so we have that ability to be able to, if a client is ready and wanting to or needing a service, we have something that's within about a mile of where we are right now that we can connect them to really, really seamlessly, which is lovely and helpful. So highly recommend finding community partners that you can do that with, because we also do connect people with other people, and have taken advantage of aim higher also to try and point some of our folks to. But I think the other piece is thinking about what role our case managers play. And a lot of our clients come in and they have a number of different touch points with services. So they have their housing case manager for permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing, and then they may have a community support worker from a mental health agency, and then a therapist or a psychiatrist. They may have an ACT team, or some community, some higher level support around mental health. They may have sobriety sponsors. They may have a whole bunch of different people that are touchstones to one or another places around the city. And one of the things that our case managers focus on is teaming. So often we will bring all the pieces, all the players together in a meeting, so we're all on the same page. We're all working with the client, and we can be like, you are not going to be pulled. Like, I don't know if you've ever watched Scooby-Doo, but when he gets really scared, sometimes Scooby-Doo fractures and goes off 4 different directions, and then is held by his tail and springs back again. And I think sometimes our clients feel like that. This case manager is telling me how to do that. This case manager is telling me how to do that. That person's telling me how to do that. Where am I supposed to go? And we really focus with teaming all of those together and working to bring all the supports on the same page, talking to each other, working together to create a cohesive team that can benefit our clients, and help stabilize them, and help. Then that gets to go with them as they go forward, because if all those teams are already talking, once they move out into their own place, they've still got those connections together and continue to work to support the client.
That's great. I love
And
it.
I think I'm sorry.
I was just saying, I love the Scooby-Doo illustration. That was great.
I think the last thing I wanted to add, as Rekha was talking, so recently, and this came out of seeing that we had a high number of participants coming in who were still active in their addiction. We started a AA and a peer support group within Valley Place. So we've been offering that. We've also noticed that a lot of the participants have expressed concern about budgeting or just their finances, because within the Bridge program, you have participants who are PSH, which is permanent supportive housing, but then you also have individuals who are on the rapid rehousing side. So they're going to be paying rent, have a portion of that. And so learning how to budget and manage money. So we started a financial literacy program as well, where we teach the participants, what is your credit? How does that impact you? How do you save? How do you open an account? Things like that. So we've really been capturing, as we're seeing the people cycle through, like, okay, we're seeing a lot of this. Let's start a group that focuses on that. So those are some of the other things too, in terms of wraparound services that we've been implementing on site for the participants to be able to take advantage of outside of going out to outside providers.
Rebecca, you touched a little bit on this, but what role do community partnerships play in your Bridge housing programs, and how do you cultivate those relationships?
So I think that there are a couple things that have been really significant for us. We've had to do things like invite some of the officers from our local precinct to come in and tour the program, understand what we're doing, begin to explain a little bit about how this program runs and what it does and what it doesn't do. And so that they kind of understand a little bit better if we have to call for help or if they're involved with anything that's going on. But we've also built partnerships with some of the outreach agencies. Now, I know that Friendship Place has some outreach workers in it already, but there are a number of service providers in the District of Columbia that are doing outreach on a regular basis with folks that are unsheltered. And so we work to build partnerships with like Miriam's Kitchen and some other pathways to housing and places like that, just so that they also know what we have to offer and can make the referrals that we need. But then we have a social worker that's on staff that is primarily geared towards helping really make sure that we get clients the services that they need. And they've worked on doing a number of partnerships with day programs and DV services and immigration services so that we can help get folks connected to the right people when they need it, rather than it being somebody has a need and then we have to go research and we have to find. Doing some of that upfront is really helpful. And I'm just going to also say, being able to do this in conjunction with Friendship Place, like we had a lot of conversations early on and have touched base across the months, being able to have them as a resource and to be a resource for them, I hope. I think it's been really helpful because we've also learned from each other and what we've done well and what we've been growing in as we've been developing these programs, and it's helped influence both of us, I think.
Can you guys speak to any specific success stories from your program? You both have had a lot of folks who come through your Bridge housing. And what factors do you believe contributed to those successes?
So we have one participant, he just left. He had been homeless since Hurricane Katrina. He had not been able to find stable housing since that time. When he joined us in Bridge, he was at a shelter. And by us going, so-called door to door, telling about this pilot program, he, was welcomed into invited to come to Bridge housing. And it was the best thing for him because now he was actually in a stable place. He didn't have to be transient, moving from shelter to shelter, trying to get a bed here or there, or sleeping on the street. But he could actually be in one place, had a case manager assigned to say, okay, what do we need to get you to that next step? What documents do you need? What are you missing that you've lost and all of that? And connect him, like we mentioned, with those wraparound services that he was also disabled as well. So he needed a wheelchair. He needed, all these various services that he was just not able to tap into because he did not have the support or the connections and he was so transient. And so once he got into Bridge, he got his bridge case manager plus his housing case manager. And like Rebecca said, we work together, we're teaming, we're, really supporting him. He is now moved out in a beautiful ADA unit in the district. He loves it. He is so happy. And we're just so proud. We are so proud to see someone who had been homeless for so long. Hurricane Katrina was a long time ago, and he's been homeless for that long. So now he's stable in his own unit.
I like to talk about big things and little things. I remember when one of our first clients walked in the door and she got into her unit and she was like, oh, I get to take a bath. Get to take a bath in the bathtub. That's my bathtub. And that just was beautiful to me. Somebody who had wanted something for so long, but had not been able to do that for years. And then turn that around to the bigger things, like when we had one of our first transgender folks that came through, and she told us that for the first time in years, she felt she could sleep without being afraid because she had a lock on her door and nobody could come in and nobody was allowed to or able to denigrate her in any way. She had her own safe space. And then I think the other one, we had a client who came to us from the hospital. She had been severely assaulted. She had been living in the street in Adams Morgan, where the Truist Bank was, and had lost her really close friend and then had been horribly assaulted. And when she left the hospital and was told that she could come to Bridge Housing, she came into my office. Originally, her jaw had been wired shut, but when it had been removed, she came into my office and she essentially said that if I had had to go back to shelter, if I had had to go back to living on the street, I would be dead now. And I feel like this saved my life. So I had those moments where I'm like, I feel like it saved a life, but I also feel like it changes a life in every step.
Absolutely. Those are some amazing testimonies to the power of the program. What are some of the biggest challenges that you guys have faced in running your bridge housing programs, and how have you worked to overcome them?
I can hop into that first. I think the two biggest things are this. It is not always very clear to see when somebody is living unsheltered to know whether or not they can handle caring for themselves in an environment again. So we've had a fair amount of folks that have come through who we're so excited to get them into a place and then realize they do not know how to handle a stove effectively and safely, or do not have the ability to care for themselves in a healthy way through physical ailments or mental ailments, or there's a number of different reasons why that could be. So we've had that. And I think the other one that's a really big thing is so our building is owned by the District of Columbia, and so the program has to go with some of the District of Columbia rules. So we try to have a very harm reductive approach to what we do. So for those of you who don't know harm reduction, it is a way of approaching substance misuse. So instead of pushing for sobriety and maintaining a whole bunch of external boundaries around use, we create safe spaces for folks. Do not be judgmental with use, provide support around safety, Narcan, needle exchanges, like the big picture. This is what harm reduction does. And then that ends up being there's a lot of evidence that shows that ends up being much better springboard for people to take journeys into sobriety, rather than starting with that being a requirement. So we want to be able to use those sort of things in our program to not judge if somebody is under the influence, to not use, being under the influence as a reason for termination, But because we're owned by the District of Columbia, there also still can't be anything on site, and we may have to terminate if drugs are found or alcohol is found in the building. And that has been one of the biggest challenges, to be able to communicate effectively with people that we want to support them in their journey and support the choices that they're making, and understanding that some of the substance use is self-medicating for issues that go way beyond what we can help them address and triage and fix in the short amount of time that we have them. But at the same time, being very clear that if some of this is blatant and being used on site, that can really tie our hands, and then we have to move to terminate. And every single time, that feels very much like what we're doing is just perpetuating the problem. Folks who need to be sheltered and need to be get given environments that will allow them that longer journey of addressing all the needs that the kaleidoscope of things that plays into substance misuse, we don't have that ability to do in the same way because of some of those rules. So we can make the choices that we can and do the best we can, but I think that's one of our biggest challenges.
So I think for us, I would say systems and policy challenges. We're definitely seeing that a lot, that work against the population that we're serving. And it could be for simple things like getting a birth certificate or getting their ID, just really simple, basic things that should seem really easy to navigate, but they keep coming against these roadblocks just to get that basic thing that they need. They can't not have that to move on. So I've been seeing a lot of that and just trying to help them to navigate. And also for, some of our participants, especially with the rapid rehousing ones, just having landlords who don't want to rent to our population. They discriminate against them. They're not supposed to use their credit history or other things, but they will still look at that, and hold that against them and not want to rent. So just the lack of affordable housing and just people, not understanding or wanting to work with that. And then on the other side, the challenges that I'm seeing from a staff perspective is the vicarious trauma, because this is heavy stuff. You are working with individuals who have experienced trauma. Sometimes you're seeing it unfold before your eyes, and it's hard for the staff to sit with that daily and to carry on. So we have had to be very mindful and deliberate as an organization to say, okay, we need to find an outlet for our staff to make sure that they can do their job and do it well as they continue to serve our participants.
And I also just 100% co-sign that about the vicarious trauma and the struggles with the basic things. I think the other thing I would add in there is there are some distinct lacks in what DC has to offer, and one of those is assisted living for folks that are living without income or have been experiencing homelessness. So especially if somebody is not over 65 and has some pretty significant needs that are going to mean that they're not going to be able to live on their own, the limits or the resources for them are very limited.
Yes.
Look into the future. What do you guys have as goals for your programs? And do you plan to expand or adapt in response to the changing needs of your community?
We have been running with a wait list for probably since February of this last year, which kind of speaks to us about the need. And so I think Community of Hope has been keeping its eye to, is this something that needs to be expanded, at least in the short to middle term? But also I think our biggest piece is like, how do we advocate for what bridge housing is and maybe expanding the gateways to that? So for example, you probably have seen some of this data, but there are a lot of people who have been matched to vouchers, and not very many of them. There's a very small percentage of those, it's relatively small, that have been matched to service providers. And those are the sort of arbitrary gates that come into bridge housing is we have to have folks that have been both matched to the voucher and also matched to a provider. If they haven't had that provider, there's still not space for them. And so I think that is one of our sort of bigger, longer term, like how do we advocate for those for whom housing is going to be an option, but because of the capacity of the programs in the district don't match up to that yet, where do they fit in the spectrum, and how can we advocate for that? So I think that's one of the things that we are looking to in terms of what are the changing needs of our community. What kind of ways can we continue to be more inclusive rather than less inclusive? And I think also the things within the program that we're looking to expand, how do we expand value-added programming that meets the needs of what our clients that come through need, whether it is, like Gayan was talking about, financial literacy, or wouldn't it be great if we could co-locate some of our healthcare or mental health care or substance use services on site where we are to give folks the most expedient, barrier-free options to getting the services that they may need.
I think for us, absolutely. A lot of what Rebecca just mentioned, we definitely want to expand. The need is there. It definitely is there. I think for us, we definitely would like to collaborate more with the city to support with the encampment clearing, and just, you know, having that be a smooth transition to really serve those individuals that truly need it, so they know, you know, there is an option, and it doesn't have to be a shelter bed. There is an option that's a lot, you know, more desirable than having to line up on the street to get a bed. And also with that being said, also creating a crisis response team to deal with that. We were part of the McPherson encampment clearing. We got a number of individuals from that, and it was really hard for them because they were, you know, rehomed, and just suddenly now they're in this program. And for a while, they would just stay in the rooms and they would not come out. They would, you know, maybe show up to get a meal and then they would go back. They would not come out into the community for a long time. So we created a therapy group just for them. And we realized that was actually really helpful. They got to talk to each other, they got to see, and then we had some of our old participants join that group as well to talk to them. But then we realized, okay, this is definitely needed. We have to think, when we're thinking futuristic, we have to have a solid crisis plan in place for, you know, this unique population, and how do we partner with the city to streamline that a lot better, and to let them know, okay, this is what it was for, this is what Bridge was created for, so let's use that. Let's use Bridge to, you know, help individuals get off the street.
I love that. Thank you guys so much. I think there have been some questions in the chat, and I think Reverend Rachel, you're going to help facilitate those questions.
Yes, and if you have additional questions, go ahead and type them in now. So I'm going to start with we have a couple of like practical questions. Elaine would like to know, how big are your Bridge housing buildings? And then Martha would like to know if this is communal housing, or does each person or family have an apartment or a private bed and bath? And how does it differ from like an overnight shelter where everybody's housed together?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, Valley Place has 50 beds. The Bridge at Girard has between 43 and 45. We have that because we have a couple units that could be for a couple, like a partnered couple that does not have children. So none of ours has like families with children the most we could have would be a partnered couple. Our programs are laid out just slightly different. Each one of us is an apartment style building. So the Bridge at Girard, we have 20 apartments. Every client gets their own bedroom that locks, but they share the common areas, the kitchen, the living room, and the bathroom with one or two other folks. Valley Place has some single rooms, but if I remember correctly, they also do have one or two folks that share a bedroom, but then they share common areas of the apartment as well. So there is also that bonus of we each have catered box meals that folks can come down and get a meal, take it back up to their room for breakfast and for dinner, and then they're responsible for their own, but we fully fit out kitchens so that clients can make choices on what they want to eat and cook them when they want to cook them, and do what they would want to do, and we provide some support around food for those that don't have that. But I think that's, I hope I'm remembering correctly and answering for you guys.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, the difference from a regular shelter, there's no lining up for a bed. Participants don't have to leave at a certain time every day. Some shelters have that where you have to be out and then come back at a certain time. We don't ask participants to leave. You know, we see it as their home for now until they have their permanent home, so they don't have to wake up at 7 and be out and be back. You know, we do have a set time that we say, okay, be back by 10 for curfew, but that's to make sure that everyone's accounted for, everyone's safe, but we don't tell them they have to get out of the building or the unit by a certain time or line up outside like other shelters would have you do.
And we also, I think both of us really operate, again, using that trauma-informed care lens. A lot of people have been really traumatized by security and things like that. And all the shelters you will find have multiple security guards right at the front. You have to walk through a metal detector, put your things through before you walk in the door. But we have both really tried to not have that be, to have, like, especially at the Bridge, we have it be that our resident monitors, who are like our staff, who are trained in de-escalation, who are trained in connecting with folks, that they're the primary point person, that we do have security on site, but the security does not take the lead unless there's like a crisis where they need to intervene. So that is very different than you would have in shelters. The Valley Place and us are slightly different. We decided not to do a curfew. We instead decided that there's the expectation that you are there overnight, but you know, if you come back at 2 a.m, that is fine. It's just the absences have to be cleared in advance with a case manager, or they're considered unexcused. So we're trying to, again, allow people to have as much choice and keep as many barriers down as possible, because some of those are the big things of why clients do not want to be in shelter, is because they have to be there by 7 and then they have to be out by 8 in the morning. And you do often find that somebody who's been in shelter for a long time has a hard time adjusting to, oh, I can stay in my bed all day and that's fine. It's a big adjustment for them.
The other thing, you guys sort of touched on this by mentioning that your rooms are predominantly single rooms. For shelter, almost all shelter in DC for single adults is congregate-based shelter. And so that means best case scenario, you have 12 roommates, worst case, many more in the same room. And there are a lot of things, and that's really can be really traumatizing to folks to be in those environments with people they don't know. They feel unsafe in those kinds of environments. So, and that I think it was Rebecca, you shared the story about being able to lock your own door, and that safety aspect, being able to have your own personal space, is really transformational.
Yeah, so just a follow-up for clarification, you both do have staff people who are on site at your Bridge housing facilities 24/7?
Yes.
Like,
Yes, we do.
and these are like social workers, case managers.
So our case managers are there Monday through Friday, typical, 9 to 5. And then, but around the clock, we call them residential advocates. and they are the ones that are assisting with the meals and checking on the participants, providing whatever, they need. It's making sure everyone's okay. But their staff, they're in the program 24/7. There's always someone on site.
Like an RA in a college dorm, right?
There you go. Yes, absolutely.
So
Really
we had
was.
somebody ask, how do you identify who is eligible for bridge housing? And I would like to combine that with another question. What are the requirements that housing have, sobriety, income, et cetera? And how do you get your guests to that level of eligibility? So I think that's two questions. One, what are the requirements for bridge housing? And then the requirements to get into permanent supportive housing, and how you help your guests get to that level.
So everybody walks in the door already attached to a housing assistance, whether it's a rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing. So that decision has already been made before they come to us, and eligibility for being in the bridge housing is that they are matched to that housing assistance and they're matched to a provider, and they have a provider. So then those providers or the outreach workers that are working with them can refer them DHS vets to make sure they meet those qualifications, and then they come to us, and when we get a bed, we put them in.
When you say provider, do you mean medical provider or?
We mean housing provider.
Housing provider.
So when you get permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing, both of those housing interventions and assistance come with case management. And so there is a housing provider that provides that ongoing case management with them for the entirety that they're in the program. So they have to have that case management before they can be coming into our programs.
But as far as, I think you mentioned something about sobriety. So for our program, that is not a requirement. Sobriety, once we get the referral, and if we have the bed available, that's it. They're coming in, and it doesn't matter what their mental health needs are, their sobriety needs are, whatever it is. Very low barriers. There's nothing really that, once DHS says they are vetted and would like you to take this person, for us to say no. There really isn't.
So I understand you talked about removing barriers to entry, but once they're in the bridge housing program, do you have things in place like code of conduct or behavioral expectations, or are there certain benchmarks that people have to meet? I heard Rebecca talking about the tension between substance abuse and not having stuff on site, but can you just elaborate more on that? Like people who have mental health challenges or substance abuse issues.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So yeah, absolutely. We do have program rules that have been worked on, combined with oversight with DHS, with Valley Place. We do have the program rules, and when the participant comes in to do their intake process, we do go over that to say, here are the basic expectations of just respecting each other's personal space and respecting staff. We do ask that you participate in the case management process, and so that we can assist you with moving along. But it's not anything that's stringent. It's more of just making sure that we can all coexist and that people have respect for each other.
One of the things that is really beautiful, we both worked on our program rules separately with the two programs, and then sat down and kind of looked at them together. And I really appreciated Friendship Place started this, but if you use like a trauma-informed lens, right? So thinking about the trauma that people might have gone through and what could trigger it, and how do we remove as many of those as possible? One of the big things is, you may not, you must not, you have to, you must. If you don't, you're getting kicked out. Like, all of those are really trauma-inducing things. Like if we were told that, like it's already hard enough we read our own leases and it says you may not smoke in your unit or you will be fined, right? Like all those things already exist and are difficult, but like think about somebody who's had nothing but somebody else decide when and when they cannot do whatever they've not for however long. So we worked to reframe our program rules to start off with like, this is what we're wanting to do. We want to help you succeed. We want to build on your strengths. We want to help you move into your own space. And to that end, this is what we agree to do, and this is what we are asking you to agree to do. And when we set in disciplinary policies with that, it's still written in the eyes of, in order to help you succeed and get to this place, you need to, we need to ask you to follow through on this, and we promise to follow through on that. We're always going to try and give people choices. Sometimes the choices are, you stop doing that, or we're going to have to do X, right? And maybe up into termination, but we're always going to be trying to do something progressive before then, and always with the eye to how can we reframe this moment back into, in order to get you in your own place, like that kind of language. And so kudos to Friendship Place for even starting to frame that in that way. But as you think of creating rules around a program, thinking it from how we can frame it to a client of what it is we're trying to help you build, what you have to agree for, and what we are going to agree in order to make that happen.
Sounds like covenantal language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just want to come back and follow up because I think that this question about requirements was not answered to the questioner's satisfaction. So Joe would like to know, what is required by the housing providers, income, sobriety, mental health, and how does the bridge housing staff get your participants to progress to that point? Are there requirements from the housing providers?
No, the housing providers are also housing first. Like that is one of the mandates of the District of Columbia. So there should be nothing with the exception of, I think, an open violent felony that is not yet adjudicated, or a Class A sexual offense that can keep somebody from getting their permanent supportive housing voucher. Maybe not entirely 100% on that, but that's my understanding. So mental health is seen as an illness and a barrier to housing, and so thus eligible for permanent supportive housing or for housing assistance. Same with substance misuse. Like Medicaid now says substance misuse is one of the things that is, it's a disease, and so therefore not a barrier to getting housing assistance. We are always going to be trying to work, and housing providers are also going to be trying to work to provide the resources and services to help folks get assistance to move beyond where they are, and Bridge Housing partners with them in that process. Our big thing is, can we make sure that we put the resources and the resources team around the client that will go with them as they go? So when they're moving into their own home, they already have their connections with substance abuse counselors or mental health therapists or teams that can help support them in the journey as they go. But none of those are going to be things that are going to stand in the way for them getting housing assistance, nor should it, in my opinion.
I'll add, and this may sound really obvious, but just in order to get one of the vouchers, you have to be homeless. Like that's the prerequisite, is that you have to be homeless. And depending on what kind of voucher, there might be lengths of, for a permanent supportive housing voucher, you have to have a documented disability and be chronically homeless. So typically that means you're homeless for more than 1 year. Rapid rehousing has different qualifications, but for permanent supportive, which is sort of the big one that's people are talking about these days, those are the requirements to qualify for the vouchers.
I'm going to come back to another practical question. So Joan would like to know, in your bridge housing programs, how many people share a bathroom And how is bathroom safety maintained?
So for us at Valley Place, that really varies. There are some units that there are only 2 participants in the unit, so they each have their own bedroom, so they're both sharing the bathroom. They, like Rebecca said, they share the common areas, the kitchen, etc. The bathroom doors do have locks, so they're able to go privately use the bathroom and to not be afraid that there's no one watching or being able to enter that space. And it's in the apartment. There's no going down the hall to a communal shower down the hall or anything like that. It's, if you picture having a roommate in college type thing and you're sharing a bathroom in your apartment, it's similar kind of setup. For others, we have some units that there are 4 ladies in that apartment because they're paired up like 2 to a bedroom. In some cases like that, and it's the same thing. They share the bathroom in the apartment. So, and we've not had any safety concerns or issues. They make it work. They get along, so.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. That's pretty much how it is with us too, so.
Okay. Denise would like to know how do you handle conflict amongst participants, and have you had any serious injuries? And do the residents have access to chaplains? Spiritual support, I guess.
So one of the things that we have built into our program rules is that anybody who is in any support system for the clients can be able to visit the clients. So that includes, and is explicit in that, any kind of faith leader, community support worker, case manager, social service person. So we do not provide, there's not a chaplain on our staff or something like that, but we make it possible for anybody who wants to have their faith leader come visit them, they can do that. And we can also connect them with, if they're looking for something and they ask, we can let them know what's in the area that's close that they could maybe access if they want. That's the easier question. The conflict question is a little bit more difficult. On the one side, everything is case by case, because there could be as many different reasons for what causes a conflict as there are conflicts. And it can be everything from the nexus of their substance use and their mental health and being with somebody else. It could be challenging boundaries because of all kinds of mixed feelings being in a new kind of environment. It could be the fear of being in a new environment that they haven't been in a while. Could be that all kinds of things that could be playing into this. Just like with us, there are all kinds of things that affect when we get mad at somebody or when we act out or what happens. We work very hard to make sure that our staff is well trained in working on nonverbal cues and nonverbal de-escalation and verbal de-escalation to work to make sure that we can lower the temperature. But the other thing that we do is we make sure that we try to work very hard to make sure one case manager has all the persons in a specific unit, so we can do mediation, we can have conversations around chores about what is expected. We also work to set the expectation, nobody is required to be anybody's friend in this program. It's never going to be the expectation. We do not expect our clients to greet us when they come in and out of the building. We do not expect our clients to have to tell us where they're going. They are adults. They get to make those decisions. And the same thing in their unit. We do not expect that everybody in that unit is friends. We are working to find a way to coexist. So we'll work on addressing all of those things. And like I said earlier, we have progressive disciplinary things. So we'll start with, sort of verbal redirection, having conversations around what happened and how can we do things differently. And we can move all the way up to, if something gets violent or overly aggressive, we can do emergency transfers or terminations if we need to. We've been doing this about 18 months now. I think I have done 3 terminations because of a credible act of violence. If I could have done things differently, I think only 2 of them would I continue to do. I think one of them was much more about protecting self and space than it was about being extremely aggressive. But two of them, one of them was just, like only one of them involved any kind of weaponry, and it wasn't anything like it was a small kitchen knife. So it wasn't like we have not experienced anything where it's been really dangerous or, frightening. And although there have been times where people's temperature has gotten really high, between the resources that we have in the building and using 911 when we have to, even though we don't want to all the time, we've been able to manage those pretty effectively.
And I have done everything Rebecca just said is very similar to what we do.
And have you had any concerns with residents having weapons, or there's a question here about without metal detectors or focusing on security staff, how do you know if residents have guns or knives? And do you have community meetings for current residents while persons are on site?
So we do have community meetings. We have those once a month, and that's where they usually get updates about upcoming events or changes within the program that might impact them. As far as what I have never had a participant with a gun, and I say that way, we've never ever had a participant who never had that. We've never had any issues of violence with weapons or things like that. We do that as part of the intake process. We do ask participants to not, we do say that up front that weapons are not allowed in the program. And, so far I have not seen anyone, bring a gun or anything like that into our program. And for those participants who would come in, let's say with a knife that's longer than 3 inches or whatever, they will turn it into their case managers. We label it and they get it when they exit the program. So that's how we've handled that. If they say, oh yeah, I do have this knife, and it's usually not an issue, they turn it over, we label it, we have a safe, we lock it up in the safe, and when they're ready to exit, they get their property when they leave. So that's how we've handled that, and it's been working. We've not had any problems so far.
I very much wish we could do that because we're a DC-owned building. It makes it a little bit more difficult for us to do a program like that. There was a program in Seattle that had a system that if I could borrow it tomorrow, I would borrow it. Essentially what they did was, those like bank bags that, you put the money in and you zip and you lock. They had a lockbox with those bank bags. And so when clients come in, anything that was sort of contraband, your weapon, your drugs, whatever, stick in that bag, lock it up. You take the key with you, and that bag goes in the sort of the lockbox at the front desk. If nobody asks any questions, nobody, you just do that. And that works so well for their program on so many levels. And I would do that in a heartbeat if we could. So I highly advise looking into something like that, or something like Gayan was talking about, where you can label and give it to the staff and then get it back. I think the thing that we need to remember, it is easy for me to think you're safe here now, you don't need a weapon. But I have not lived the experience of most of the people that have been in my program. One of my clients in sort of a previous thing told me about how she kept brass knuckles hidden right outside the property that she could go get before she went out. This person had been sexually assaulted multiple times and could not face being in the community without something to protect herself. And I think we have to kind of keep that in mind if we're having that harm reduction thing. It is very easy for me to go, I don't want any weapons in this building because I want my staff to be safe. I want all of us to be safe. But for some people who have experienced what they've experienced, it is not safe if they don't have something or know where their something is, so that if something happens, it can. So there is a very fine line and a very important thing to try and think about balancing about, is is asking my folks to be in this entire program all this time without any kind of protection really a fair thing to ask? Or is there a way to do it where those things don't come in the building or don't come in with them into their space, but they can have them if they need them when they go off site? So just something to think about.
I think that's a really good point. And probably it speaks to the fact that you guys haven't had a lot of those issues because you are creating a safe space, right? The reason people have weapons is because they feel unsafe. And so because you guys are creating safe spaces, there isn't that same level of need. Now, when they leave the building, right, they don't have that same level of safety, and that's where that comes into play, again, potentially. But because you're creating safe spaces, it's not necessary in many ways.
I think there's a couple questions that we might need to just take one step back, because this is new for us. You all are immersed in this, but can you kind of back us up one step and help us understand what's the difference between rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, bridge housing, transitional housing, and how does a person enter that process?
Yeah, so I can start off with, I think Gayan did really good with the bridge and transitional, so I'll let you take that in a minute, but let me talk about housing interventions. I talked briefly earlier about some of the outreach organizations. Like, there are different organizations that are responsible for different parts of the city, reaching out to folks that are experiencing homelessness there, establishing relationships, seeing what they need. And they have this tool called the SPDAT, which is a really quick and rapid way of like asking 10 questions and getting an assessment of the needs a client may be facing, what their barriers are, and how long that they've been experiencing homelessness. And that gives a very quick and dirty way of seeing if somebody is going to need a longer term intervention or can deal with a shorter term one. So if it's shorter term, and this is generally folks that have not been experiencing homelessness for very long, under a year, and they're not chronic, for folks who have some sort of income already and need a leg up into the housing market, need to be able to establish themselves so that they can find stability. And so rapid rehousing is a short-term 1-year program where about 60% of about 40% of their income goes towards rent, and the rest of the rent is covered by the District of Columbia, but they're responsible for utilities. And this is a progressive thing that kind of grows over time. Their portion of their income towards rent grows over time. And the aim is to help them exit that program within a year and be able to sustain rent on their own, whether it's in their own place or sharing with somebody else. It's kind of that sort of quick leveling back up, entering back into that system. If you score higher on the SPDAT, it is indicated that you're going to need more longer term support. And so that puts you in the permanent supportive housing camp. And that is for folks who are chronically experiencing homelessness, which means at least a year or more, and have some sort of disabling condition, whether that's mental or substance or physical or a combination of those. And that score indicates that there's going to need to be a longer intervention, because finding stability and finding the ability to be independent is going to take a lot more work. And so permanent supportive housing is just that. It is that longer term intervention that is going to be at least 10 years, if not longer. And in that, a client pays up to 30% of their income towards rent. They can also get some assistance around utilities, depending on their level of income, depending on what some of their disabling conditions might be. And it also has that eye towards much more intensive case management support. And it has a Medicaid component. So everybody's had this Medicaid assessment, and some of what goes on with permanent supportive housing can be billed to Medicaid, because it is about wraparound care and working to try and make sure that they get the assistance they need in order to stabilize, even with that ongoing assistance. That kind of makes sense a little bit? Okay.
Really cool.
Gayan, do you want to take the other?
Sure. And so I guess the next part to that question was comparing the bridge program to the transitional housing. So like I mentioned earlier, bridge housing, the goal for bridge was to eliminate or remove as many of the barriers to shelter, to housing as possible. Whereas in the traditional transitional housing model, there were certain things, certain criterias and certain things that you had to meet to remain in the program, to be eligible and things like that. Whereas we are not focused on that because we're housing first, and we are trying to make sure that those individuals who need to be housed have a place to go. So that's the difference.
And the people who are participating in bridge housing have been matched with a voucher.
Yes, they have to be matched. Yeah. So all
they
our
have
referrals.
They have a place they're going. They just
Yes.
need to be in the
Yes. So in order to get in to bridge housing, all our referrals go through DHS. And, DHS, like Rebecca mentioned, does all the vetting, and they've completed the VI-SPDAT, and they've been matched to a provider. And then now they're here in the next phase of being in the program. And, also Bridge was meant as a way to expedite the leasing up process, to expedite, because they recognize, okay, these are folks that they've waited a while, they're on the street, and we're not trying to keep them in a shelter type situation. We really want to get them into their permanent place. So Bridge was also that program to try to speed that up and to expedite. Unfortunately, because it was meant to be a 90-day stay. But with all the backlog, we've had people that have been, unfortunately, in Bridge for longer than 90 days. But when the model was first created, it was initially intended that participants were supposed to be in and out in 90 days. That's the ideal.
Yeah, sometimes we do see that. Sometimes it moves really quickly. I think the other thing for bridge housing that was really important is they realized that getting some of the pieces needed to get their application in for permanent supportive housing takes a lot of work. Like Gayan talked about, getting all those vital documents. And if somebody is transient or moves from encampment to encampment, it's really hard to keep tabs on where they are and making sure that this is getting done and those documents can get turned in. So having them in bridge housing can really expedite the process by having them reachable and having people who can lay eyes on them or have conversations with them in real time.
Yeah.
I want everybody's time. So I have just two more questions, and one is a quick question, I think, and one might be a little bit more reflective. So the first is, what is the approximate per person cost of your programs?
Ooh, I don't think
I have it. So if you want to go to the next question, I have it from both.
Okay, so Kelly will look that up.
Let me pull that up.
Okay, so this is from Jen Watley, and this is the question I would like to end on. Although we'll come back to you, Kelly, for the number. So it says, since both of your programs are in the pilot stage, what do you wish you had known before you started, and what would you do differently with 2020 hindsight?
I think for us, I definitely, and we've already started this, making sure that we provide a lot of trauma-informed training for our staff. We already have trainings that are, just part and parcel of what we do, but just really getting the trauma-informed lens really honed in, and also with the mental health, the substance use, mental health, just getting our staff really trained to assist these participants coming in, so that they know exactly what to do. And when they see, certain behaviors or certain things coming up, they know exactly how to respond and not cause further trauma or trigger the participants. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the beauties of being a pilot program was both of our programs just set the goal of understanding that this is fluid. and we spoke it loud to our staff, and we spoke it loud to our supervisors that this is fluid and it is going to change as we learn things. So I it's very hard for me to go like that is what I would do. This particular thing is something I would do differently, because I loved that we have been able to change and shift gears and refocus on some of those things sort of midstream. I think in similar vein to what Gayan said, I think I would have really liked our a lot more resources around, or our teams being trained a lot more in how we access some of the care for older adults in the District of Columbia to navigate that, because our teams had been all with families, and we transitioned from a family shelter to this program. So that was like, those were some things that we didn't really have to access in the family side, and so that's been kind of a little learning curve. Um, and definitely helping our resident monitors, which are like the resident advocates that Gayan talks about. Those were both like helping them transition more smoothly would have been good. But honestly, like the thing, it's like systemic. We as staff, because we are considered the secondary case managers, we're not their primary case managers. The housing case manager is primary. So those folks do all of the pieces with the permanent supportive housing packet. And there are so many times when if we had just been able to do that, we could have expedited things a lot sooner. So if I could do it over again, what I would say is that we need to be able to have access to the portal. We need to be able to submit things if things need to be submitted, and having the right people to go to if the primary case managers were not doing or following through the way they needed to follow through. So it's more of a systemic thing, but I think building in that level of being able to assist, I think would be what I would do.
Much, both of you.
And for the dollar, I only have a Valley Places number. It's around $1,700 a month per person, but I put a big asterisk on that. That's just for Friendship Places case management and management of the program. And there are a lot of things that are not included in that cost, like the catering, the security, facility, like rent to facility, like that, but that's the case management cost.
Yeah, and that just to keep that in mind, like a lot of us that are contracted with the District of Columbia, we have two different budgets, one that is operations and one that is services, and so it gets more difficult to layer that in. And our program, I don't have anywhere close to that breakdown, but because we don't own the building and the District of Columbia does, that changes budget numbers, and same with like the contracted services that are paid for by the community partnership or the District of Columbia, those get removed out from that. That would probably be very helpful for you to know.
Absolutely.
I just want to thank you both and Kelly so much for tonight. This has been incredibly informative. You all shared so much helpful information with us, and you've been so generous with your time. We are having 3 more sessions. So next week on Wednesday at 7, we will have a panel of GMC guests who have been through bridge housing programs, and they're going to talk about their experience and how bridge housing has impacted their lives. So that'll be another wonderful panel, and I think very informative. And if you have questions that have come up, you know, throughout the week, just hold on to them, and hopefully throughout these sessions, your questions will be answered. This is a process of discernment. I want to, if it's okay with Rebecca and Gayan, I'd like to bless you tonight. Would that be okay? Could we just all like put our hands up and extend our hands to these amazing servants and humans who are doing this incredible work? God, we just want to bless Rebecca and Gayan and their staff and the people that they serve. We thank you for this important work that they are doing in the midst of so much trauma and so much pain. And we are grateful for the impact that they are having on people's lives, and for the ways in which people are being able to move from crisis, from trauma, from pain, from isolation into community, into safe space. And we just pray that you would continue to give them the strength and all that they need to continue to do this work. And I pray this in the name of Jesus, the healer who loved all the outsiders.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Really, really good. And 8:31. So I'm going to stop our recording and our live streaming and let you all say good night to each other.